Leanne.
Miriam,
Welcome.
hello.
Hello, welcome back to the show.
It's so good to be back. Every opportunity to chat to you is an awesome one.
Yes, and just following your journey and the First Time Facilitator and 200 episodes.
Well, it was 200. I thought I was going to stop, but I just have this, maybe it's separation anxiety, but I just keep sort of replaying old episodes and trying to keep it alive every week, which is so funny because I made a big deal of saying goodbye and then I thought, I just want to keep publishing. So there we go.
It's difficult to stop, right? And to close.
Yeah, especially when you don't have something to replace it.
True. So looking back to the 200 episodes, you called it the First Time Facilitator back then, because you started calling yourself facilitator. What has changed, and are you still calling yourself a facilitator today?
Oh, I don't call myself a facilitator today, but so that means a lot has changed, right? So 200 episodes ago, that was probably about 210-ish weeks because I was putting out a podcast episode every week. So when I started it, I was working internally. I was sent just around the world running leadership programs. I had no idea what I was doing. And I listened to podcasts and just couldn't find anything out there. So that's why I started the podcast, essentially to scratch my own itch, because it gave me the opportunity to chat to much more experienced facilitators around the world and ask them how they do it, much the same as you, Miriam, like just to find some inspiration. And I don't know, you might share this as well. What was fascinating about that is being a podcast host and the parallels between that and facilitation, I find are very similar. And so in my first few, I think 10 or 20 episodes, I was very scripted, much like my facilitation game was more like a training role. It was scripted. It had like between 10:01 and 10:02, do this activity and say this, and then as I progressed through the facilitation podcast, episode 100, and that timeline with my facilitation career, I became much more looser with what I was doing. I had a framework and a structure, but I was looser. I think that was a graduation that really occurred. Although I will I say hey to Tim Ferguson, who's been a guest on your show. I know he listens all the time. He said to me one day, he goes, when do you ever stop calling yourself a first-time facilitator? Because you never run the same workshop. Like it's the different environment, different context, yes, different audience, different time of day. And so I guess there's a part of me that's always part of first-time facilitator, but right now I'm looking at bringing in facilitations to like the tools of facilitation into more a consulting type of role. So that's been the journey.
Oh, wonderful. So it's more the facilitative leadership and facilitative project facilitation, for instance.
Well, it's just a skill set that you can use all the time. And I think there's a great book I read. We talk about foundational book that just completely shifted the way I think about things. It's called The Courage to be Disliked. It's a Japanese book. And the fundamental theme of the book is that all problems are interpersonal problems.
Yeah. And
if you think about it, yes, you see it all around you. So facilitation is about group dynamics and people. And so it's the ultimate tool for any work that you do. So thank goodness I've got that as a base.
Yeah, I was just thinking about it when you said you're always a first-time facilitator, because even if the time of the day and you are the same and the group is the same, the group dynamics will be different, because there's this, they're the individuals of the group, but then there's this additional entity, which is just the dynamic between all these individuals. And there only must be one person who had a bad day. And everything, or you had a bad day.
Yeah.
And everything's different.
Everything's different. And it sounds really corny, Miriam, but like I was going for a run the other day. I listened to the Nike running coach sometimes, and he was saying it was part of this headspace run. And he said, every run that you do is a once in a lifetime run. And we always say that phrase once in a lifetime for something amazing and magnificent. But I reflected on it. I thought, yes, I'm running the same track, in lockdown. I could only run the same sort of 5K route, but everyone was different. Every run was a once in a lifetime run. So every moment, every workshop is once in a lifetime.
I love that. And it's also, everyone is so unpredictable. It's the same route. It's often the same weather, often the same day of the time of the day. And sometimes I started running again, finally, last year.
I saw that. Well done.
Thank you. And there are days there I think, oh, today is going to be amazing. And then I have no form. And other days where I think, let's see whether I can reach the next corner. And I don't stop running. So it's also this, I think that's also a facilitation mindset to be okay with what is and what comes up. And then to accept, oh, I thought that I was in top form. Apparently I'm not. So now do I want to continue running or do I want to turn around? Everything is okay, but just take a decision and go with it, right?
That's it. Just and run with it. There you go. Look at these beautiful metaphors coming through.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. It's the running metaphor is very powerful, and also just the being around in space and getting lost in your thoughts sometimes. I think that was my in terms of just getting ready for a workshop. I love to run beforehand just to sort of clear the decks of what's going on in my mind so I can be present.
Yeah. And it's funny that you mentioned with the scripting, the parallel between podcasting and workshop preparation, and I experienced the same. Before, I still sent my sample questions and I ask them less and less, and still have the impression that there is something about preparing these questions. So still I would not walk into a workshop totally unprepared. So yes, maybe not scripted, but not unprepared. So where do you see the difference and where do you draw the line?
I'm much like you, because in terms of sending out prep questions, but I'll even say to guests, look, here's the type of question that I might ask you as part of the show. But I use it more as a primer for them to go, all right, so they're getting the headspace of this, these are the audience, this is this kind of slant that we want. And very often I might ask, out of the 10 questions or 8, I might ask, 1 or 2. Like the first one traditionally just to help them get comfortable with the show and the format so they get lost in the conversation. But yeah, apart from that, it doesn't really serve a purpose at all. Some people and what I find interesting as well, we both interview facilitators. I wonder if I have some guests that no, Leanne, I don't read the questions beforehand. And then others are you can tell that they're reading notes and their bullet points. And it just shows because we talk to facilitators, just that the range of different styles. And so what's so fascinating is you think after 200 episodes, you establish, okay, this is a type of facilitation. This is, in terms of presentation, the way people show up, but the diversity in this space is so glorious. And there's space for everyone to participate and take on that role of facilitator, which I find that pretty cool. Yeah.
So true. Some even sent me their replies back, and I'm like, no, I don't want to see your answers because otherwise I'm not curious anymore.
Yes. And
also all the groups are different. So there are some who really want to see the agenda beforehand, and if they're not seeing it, they're freaking out. I had it the other day that I said, well, I first have to interview the participants before I even start thinking of an agenda, because I don't know what's happening. I don't know what happens between the spaces and what is true for you and what is true for the group. And while I was conducting the interviews and she was waiting, at some point the client sent me their agenda draft. Oh, we were thinking you could do this, and I realized either you don't have enough to do, or I'm not expensive enough. That it still leaves this room for micromanagement. And I thought this was also showing so much about different clients and also the culture of a group.
Totally, it really does. And there's a lot of discussion sometimes, and I'm quite strong on this when it comes to even the technology platforms that you use with a client, because we all know the difference now between Zoom and Teams and jumping onto a Google call, right? And so my preference, I think the best you can use is Zoom. So a client will come to me and go, we need to use Teams. And I will influence right back. And I will tell them, no, we're not using Teams. I've got a Zoom account, I've got a Zoom producer, and this is how we're going to run it for the best experience, of course, to meet your objectives. But I also find, and this is really the balance between it's probably a power and perception of power as well. A lot of facilitators that I know in jumping on the Facebook community, they will say, I've been told I have to use it Teams and I can't influence back. And I sort of question, like, really? Like, or did you just not try? And so it's really interesting, the dynamic you were talking about in terms of them creating an agenda for you. And it constantly plays out. There's sometimes a bit of tension. And I think we've just got to see ourselves as partners and trust our knowledge as the expert of the group process, right? And owning that's where we add the value. Yeah.
And it was indeed very interesting. And we had the same Teams versus Zoom discussion because Zoom very often is blocked by big corporates still, because they had one glitch at the beginning of the pandemic and now it's still blocked. So we jumped on Butter. I got to learn Butter over the weekend, and it solved all the problems. And the nice thing was that it added a little bit of excitement. It's like a team outing. So you're going to a different space that you're usually used to.
I agree.
Yeah. So
it was like, even when people on Teams jump onto Zoom, they're like, whoa, this is like just the seamless breakouts and all the stuff, the cool stuff that you can do with it. Yeah, I agree. It's like, even though you're in the same four walls, it's a different experience because you're of a new platform. That's great.
And what I find interesting is also how you have to adjust, or you can observe behavioral patterns. So on Butter, you have to raise the hand in order to queue up when you have an idea or you want to say something that you wouldn't do on Zoom. Maybe everyone raised their hand, but it's a different dynamic.
Different etiquette.
And I loved how you reflected about the power dynamics and the facilitator's mindset, also how confident you became in pushing back to your client, saying, no, that's how we do it. For the best of your experience, because you can trust me. You hired me and therefore you can trust me. And in the context of you not calling yourself a facilitator anymore. So what comes after being a facilitator?
This is where, this is the beginning of the next chapter of the story, Miriam. I just said to you, and just before we jumped on, I booked a trip to Las Vegas next week. And that's really about just busting out of the last 2 years of the same old and trying to bring back, or maybe not bring back, but just move forward and go, like, what I've always enjoyed is spontaneous and getting inspiration around people. And I'm going to a workshop in Vegas held by Alan Weiss, who's my business coach. And we're looking at shedding your old identity and actually deciding, who do you want to be? And so he sent us this prep activity where we have to map out, who do we want to attract? All those sort of questions that we think we answer. I've done a lot of reflection, but to be held accountable and be like, I'm going to go here, I'm going to talk to people and share this. So I think I will have to share what that new identity is with you, maybe in about a week's time. So sorry, podcast listeners. But what it is I basically want to, at the moment, with the word facilitator and having a podcast about facilitation, a lot of the time with businesses, I've been working with HR and L&D. And what I want to do in terms of my up-leveling is work side to side with business owners, CEOs, senior leaders, and influence at that level. I found a lot of the time working in leadership, running leadership workshops and things like that for middle management, often during the breaks, people would come up and say, this is really great, but the culture doesn't support this, or my manager doesn't do it. And I felt, I really want to make a difference. And there's certain things you can do to empower people and to take on that personal responsibility. There's also systemic things within corporations that I would like to see change. And so I need to up-level myself to influence at that level.
And would you describe, I wonder whether it's just a taxonomy thing of how, is it something about the word or the role facilitator that isn't allowed to actually sit next to the CEO and bring the CEO into the boat of this journey? Because it sounds as if you would continue to do the same word, just with a different stamp on your forehead.
That's exactly what I'm doing. It's just changing the package, right? That's all I'm doing. Changing the tagline. But language, as we know, is so powerful. As facilitators, we pay a lot of attention to it. Facilitators in HR, facilitators in L&D, that's where you sort of put it, as opposed to strategic management consultant. Where do you put that position or that role? I don't think I'll call myself that. That's a bit too corporate for me. I'm trying to figure out what that cool word is that will still put me side by side, someone in the C-suite. but it's a branding. It's purely branding. You're absolutely right, Miriam. In terms of my skill set and the way that I've up-leveled the technical side of things, yeah, I'm doing a lot of reading and learning and growth that side, but more importantly, it's the positioning. Where am I playing on the chessboard? Like what content am I putting out to create a new perception?
Yeah. And I think what confidence you're bringing also to the space, because when you're working side by side with the C-suite, you do need a different level of confidence and pushing back and asking for permission of trust. Okay, so now you listen. This is how we're going to run it.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing. And Alan Weiss, one of my favorite lines that he teaches is to say, let me tell you how I work. And rather than being, given the agenda, or it's like, okay, this is the problem, let's work through it and let me tell you now how I'll help you. So that's, language and that shift in the body language, how you communicate that. I'm not even there yet. This is right. I'm right at the beginning of this journey. I think, and that level of imposter syndrome where you think, oh, well, if they're in senior roles and they got to this level, they must know everything. But what I've discovered through a lot of conversations and working with people is they're so good at what they do in terms of the company and the operational and technical side of things. But the people and culture side of things that we take for granted because we know we do it every day, that's not high on their agenda. So that's the help and value that we can bring as facilitators.
Yeah. Together with the acknowledgement that, or the knowledge of the inner game and the importance of the inner game. I think as facilitators, similar to coaches, we spend so much time working on our mindset and being aware of, as you said, how our language impacts our surrounding. And it's that we can bring to the table working with different groups.
And the hard part, Miriam, is that because we live it every day and we do it, we don't recognize the value in it. That's the hard part. It's things that we think are obvious in a group setting, other people may not pick up. But that's, and so in terms of like monetizing that value, it's hard to do because you think, oh, well, everyone sees this or everyone knows this. And it's surprising how few people do. I'm
filter bubble.
Sorry, what'd you say?
That's a filter bubble, right? We especially as a, you build a community of facilitators. You have your Facebook groups. You interview 200 facilitators. Both of us, we're surrounding ourselves with these people. So of course we have the impression that everyone is like that because we rarely speak to normal people.
Exactly. And the problem was, can I tell you this? I was also like going to these networking events with other consultants and other speakers and other trainers and facilitators. And I was wondering why I didn't get business. It's like, hello, Leanne, start being the novelty and go to other events, like industry events where people are actually, where the facilitator or the leadership coach is a novelty there. So, just even if you think about that, like your filter bubble, yes, I agree. Build a community, hang around with people that can cheer you on because it is a very lone profession and we do get lonely. But also in terms of the marketing efforts, it's like, like we are very valuable everywhere else outside our filter bubble.
This is it makes so much sense. Yeah. To really consciously choose where do we hang out and with what purpose. So when we're in our facilitation community, we learn from each other. It's this peer learning, it's this inner growth. It's sharpening our skills, reflecting on how we do things. But it's not for, if we want to grow our business, we have to leave this bubble and show what we can do. And I think it's also good for our self-confidence, actually. Because what I realize when I hang out with normal people, they really appreciate the skill of just not interrupting and listening with the full body and listening to what's not said and reflecting back and synthesizing what they said, right? That's highly appreciated in normal life.
It is. And like you said, when we hang around fellow facilitators, it's like the best conversation because everyone's very mindful of when people can pop in. But that's not necessarily what the real world reflects.
Yeah. one thing that I have observed from the sidelines you're doing with experimenting more and more with facilitating conversations without camera.
Yes.
And you briefly mentioned the body language when you talked about your new role. And yeah, what is the role actually of body language in a conversation when facilitating it? And what do you have to keep in mind when you take this away?
Well, it's funny you said, yeah, you watched me on the sidelines. So I pretty much follow every new fad and trend. So when Clubhouse came aboard, I think it was over 12 months ago now. I was like an early adopter on Clubhouse. And I spent a lot of time just being curious around how are these rooms being run. And I jumped into rooms that were run poorly and rooms that were run really well. And I thought, well, what's the difference here? And I guess it was such an interesting time because people were jumping on board, and it's called moderation in Clubhouse. The role is a little bit different. But if you're looking ahead now to all of the technology platforms, Twitter Spaces is a big thing. It's audio only. That's growing a lot. Discord is where the whole Web 3.0 NFT world hangs out. They're all talking on voice as well. So, but when I think about it, Miriam, it's not actually new, right? So there's a few things. Number one, my first job was for Accenture back in 2007. And we were just doing phone teleconferencing where you dial in, it bleeps. So we've been doing it all along. It's just kind of bringing it back and maybe making it a bit better. In Australia as well, there's something called School of the Air. Have you heard of that?
Is it for the remote farms where they go to school? Yeah.
Yeah. So for decades,
before the internet,
people have been learning through the power of audio. And if anyone's listening to this podcast, and Miriam, if they've been listening to many of your episodes, I'm sure they could meet you and you would be best friends. So there is insane power in audio in terms of your ability to develop rapport and build a relationship, because once you lose all the other senses and you only have the sound of someone's voice, there is so much truth that comes across. My friend Ronsley Bars, he runs an audio agency, and he goes, it's very easy to tell whether someone is authentic or not just by tuning in. There's some depth of listening, and you've had Oscar Trimboli on your show as well. So I think there's immense power in it. And for many different reasons. One, even today, just recency effect. I had an MS Teams call scheduled with a client and they were running late. So we thought, oh, she'll just give me a call. So it's like a 30-minute meeting. She gave me a call. We were done in 5 minutes on audio. For some reason, I don't know if you find this, but when I hop on a video call, there just seems to be some temptation to like extend it out to, I imagine if we were on Teams, we would have spoken for 30 minutes. But audio, I don't know, there's something about speed and movement, perhaps. It's just based on my experience today. I've got a lot to say about it, but I don't know, I'm being very broad here.
Interesting. And I'm still processing. I'm still processing all the different layers, especially the last one. Why is it that we tend to extend and expand? Maybe because we want to process all the additional information that is happening, and this just takes time. So if I have only your voice, that's what I will pay attention to, and then I got everything I needed. If I see you, maybe my brain thinks, maybe my brain has FOMO. Okay, maybe there was something to explore.
Yeah, I think it's also like usually when I'm on the telephone and with AirPods in, I'm doing something else. Like I could be walking around, and usually I'm personally not very good at standing still. So when I'm in a Zoom call and I'm sort of seated at my computer, I'm stationary. Inertia kind of rings in, right? Inertia. I'll just stay here. But on the phone, you're kind of moving, and I don't know. It's quite interesting. But so that was just something I just observed today. I was like, oh, that was interesting. That call, we got it done. Yet I imagine Teams would have been different, because it usually is, and it usually goes over for some reason as well, because we have such a good time.
I will investigate on that. And actually, there's another data point that confirms your hypothesis.
Ooh,
so
N equals 2. Excellent.
Yeah, at the Never Done Before community, we recently started to use Coffee Chat, which is it's I think the coolest app that I came around in the last year, maybe 2 years. It's a virtual coffee machine. where you can invite your groups, and then it's a time box, 7 minutes conversation, video conversation. So you put the time whenever you walk to the coffee machine. So you use the app, you say, okay, I'm at the coffee machine for the next 15, 30, 60 minutes. And then the others in your group get a little notification. Miriam is at the coffee machine. Do you want to meet her? And then they click the button, and for 7 minutes sharp, you have a video call. And this is usually for me the opportunity to get up my chair, to walk around, to have a real coffee, and to have this short conversation with someone. And in 7 minutes, you can get everything done, but you're not sitting in front of the desk.
Yeah.
You're
yeah.
not
And I don't know if it's my
sitting in this
compulsion.
inertia. Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know if it's inertia or it's my compulsion to multitask and just like get the most out of every minute. But I just, there's something casual about it as well. And sometimes like when my calendar is full and someone will want to get in and have a chat, I'll say, well, why don't we do a walk and talk? And there's something beautiful and relaxing. And I had a chat with one of our mutual friends, Jimbo, in Taiwan. And so he was out walking his dog. I was out walking my dog. And it was just joyous, just to be untethered to the room. So there's some joy in it as well. But it'd be interesting to talk about. That's at a one-to-one level. I think we all know how great the phone is. The curious and interesting part is when you get like, you know, a mass of people in one of these audio rooms and you're like, well, what is going on here? How are people moderating this and self-moderating?
Yes. Thank you for bringing it back, because this would have been the next layer to explore. The Clubhouse. I spent a little bit of time there in the beginning out of curiosity, and I was very curious, as you mentioned, what is it that makes some rooms work and others not? What makes a good Clubhouse moderator? So I gave up. Tell me, what did you find out?
I wish I gave up too, because I would have done a lot more with my life if I had given up 12 months ago. There's a lot of time that I've spent there. What I think it's the structure of it. So what we're talking about is, it's an audio platform, but what I discovered where there are different structures within it. So one could be, you know, they had an expert could be on stage in sort of inverted commas. Then you could have the facilitated panel. So you have the MC and you got 3 experts up on stage doing Q&A. Then you could just do pure Q&A where it's just people at the same level jumping in and just having a conversation. So within audio, there's actually like all the different layers that would have, you know, on a stage as well. But the good rooms had set that intention. And much like a rate, you know, when you go, what's weird about Clubhouse as well is that you can jump in at any time. So I could jump into a room that had been running for 30 minutes. The best rooms are the ones where sort of every few minutes they'd actually go back and talk about the intentionality and the purpose, like any great facilitator would. Right. Welcome back to the room. We're here to talk about XYZ. If you'd like to ask a question, so set the roles very quickly. So I think they brought in a lot of good radio hosts that sort of remember to do that. Purpose, intentionality, but that stuff just doesn't change across facilitation. It doesn't matter what medium that you're in. Yeah.
Makes so much sense.
I think what's interesting about Clubhouse, which is a step above just the normal teleconference, was there was a bit of nonverbal body language in that people could raise hands. You could applaud by clicking a button and things. So show that you were getting some type of response rather than radio silence. You were kind of seeing that, people are engaged here. Yeah. It's interesting to follow.
It is, especially if and we're talking about communication behaviors of non-facilitators. And I think on a platform like Clubhouse, where you don't know who's entering the room, anyone can enter at any time, and you don't see the body language, then how do you set these rules of not interrupting, not taking too much space, how to intentionally interrupt and to guide, moderate the conversation?
I'm glad that sorry, I just jumped in then.
Yes, please.
I think you just brought up like the word that I just said, interrupt, is key. And I think the general feel of the culture of Clubhouse and with all of these spaces that have been developed since is that when you jump into a room, you kind of just linger around a bit and wait. You wait and you get a sense of what the room is all about. And you can pretty much pick up on that sense in the first 5 minutes. So if someone is talking and they're going off track and the moderator interrupts, you know that this is, okay, great, this is going to be on purpose and on point. If you are in that space of 5 minutes, you hear 3 or 4 people, different voices, you're all right, this might be an inclusive environment, I might feel safe to jump in here. Whereas the opposite experience was had, jumping into a room, there was a 5-minute monologue, it's not on topic, very quickly I'd leave that room. So, and this isn't, again, I have not researched this, but this is my perception of the experience. My goal was for about a month, just listen to rooms and see what's going on, and then get on stage and give moderating a crack.
Interesting. I was just trying to imagine how this would happen in the physical space. So what are the clues that you get if you step into a room? Imagine a conference, an open space kind of platform. Because at the end of the day, Clubhouse is a little bit like open space, and you have fish bowls or panel conversations or whatsoever.
Yeah.
So you walk into a room, how do you get that grip? If you have physical clues, is it how the space is, maybe how the chairs are put?
I think it's every sense that we have access to. So to be even the audio level that you sense, like the body language of the movement, is it up or is it low? Are people close or are they far away? I mean, social distancing kind of prohibits that. There's so many signals within that. Can you, if you look over, does it look like one person is in charge, or does it seem more democratized?
But also, who has access to the microphone? How many microphones do you have? Do you have to stand up and to walk to the microphone, or is someone bringing the microphone to you? Are you sitting in a circle or in rows with someone on stage? Do you have a stage? How many chairs do you have on the stage? Are there any chairs on the stage?
What are they wearing? Yeah, what language do they speak? Like, there's so much, and it's all, but of course our brain will subconsciously go through this in like half a second and make us and go, yeah, that's a safe place to enter, or no, I'm not going in there. So I think it's a lot faster with those visual and environmental cues.
And it seems as if it's even more democratic. I already found that a video conference is more democratic than an in-space on-site, because you don't have to have the courage to stand up and to walk and to take all the space, in which some people feel more comfortable than others.
Yeah. And
it seems almost as if audio is even more democratic, because the only thing that counts is the content that comes out of your mouth. Full stop.
And absolutely. It's the content, but also your delivery and your intonation. And I can tell, I'm a member of this sort of community, and every month they release these calls, and they're in New York, so I don't get to wake up at 4 a.m. every day to, sort of jump on the call. But I formed an impression of who all these people are, not really based on what they're saying, but how they're saying it. So I can tell someone's confidence level, I can tell what they might be like just based on their voice. And I think it's funny with even having a podcast and certain guests, some people resonate with different voices. And I wonder if two guests said the same message, but they had different voices on that, like what I imagine people would still be pulled towards one or the other person based on, like, because the speed, like, our pace, if you look at even you and I, we have dramatically different shows about the same topic because of like our voice, right? Like you can, the pace and all of that, it's so, I mean, even some rooms I join where it's just like, the voice kind of, like, people get irritated or they like it, and you can tell pretty quickly. Yeah.
It's the voice, and it's also the way how you guide conversation, facilitate it, moderate it. And which brings us back to what facilitation means, is basically we're all doing the same stuff in the room, right? I mean, none of us has invented even liberating structures. Yes, they put it into a structure, but at the end of the day, it's something we have done already intuitively. And still we're all different. And doing the same exercise with a group, some with some groups and some facilitators it works, and sometimes it doesn't. And some like one style, some the other. Yeah.
Yeah, it's fascinating.
And I wonder, you mentioned these nonverbal communications that have emerged in Clubhouse, and the rule that when you step into a space, you first observe a little bit to understand the culture that is happening. And I wonder whether there is a culture that has emerged on the platform. So is there a different way to communicate on Clubhouse as opposed to Twitter Storm, for instance? And how did this happen? Do you have a hypothesis, maybe?
I didn't until you asked the question. Now I've just formed a hypothesis right now. But
yay!
Yeah, I think Twitter's, like I said before, the Twitter spaces is really dominated by Web 3.0, which is, so that's, we're talking about cryptocurrency, blockchain technology and all that. And I've been digging in because I don't want to get left behind. Like I've seen my dad use an iPhone. I'm like, I don't want to be like that. So I want to keep like moving with the technology. So I'm just like trying to learn about all these things. And right now, because of it's quite early adoption and it's more tech focused, what I'm noticing is more males in this platform. I mean, in more of the Twitter spaces that I've joined, it's been about 90% male on there. So it can be a little bit sort of bro heavy, American bro. Like that's the type of vibe that I get. And so I haven't yet joined a Twitter space because I don't have any technical knowledge and I don't think I could really contribute in that space. I'm more about lurking and learning. But that you asked about what dictates the culture. I think it's, the early adopters onto that platform tend to dictate it. So if you were an early adopter onto Clubhouse, you could have created a room, and that room you could have run weekly, and then you create a culture through that. And then other people who are new on the platform jump into your room and they're like, oh, this is how Clubhouse is run. Okay, so I'll take this and this is how I'll run it. So much like how I developed my facilitation skill was by being a workshop participant, by going, oh, okay, so this is how you run a workshop, modeled off the people that I saw. And I picked a few things and ran my own. We're all very influenced by what we observe. And I think that is what's happening. It can shift over time. So Twitter spaces in a year from now, maybe it's more, maybe it's a little bit different, but right now it's kind of bro culture and let's make money and let's flip NFTs.
Makes total sense. That it's, the people using it, shaping the culture. And maybe then also the platform as they invite the early adopters in.
Well, yeah, Clubhouse was all iPhone, right? So do you have an iPhone?
Ah, yes. Yeah.
So the type of person that will buy an iPhone versus a Samsung, like my brother refuses to get iPhone because he wants to be a bit of a rebel and not be like everyone else. So you think, well, who is the type of person that will own an iPhone? And that, that reflects wealth as well. So there's a lot associated with that. So if you're only releasing to iPhone, you're targeting a certain demographic, which can create then the culture there. Twitter, yeah. So it's a really interesting question. And it's like, does the platform dictate it, or do the people on the platform, I don't know, like chicken or egg?
Yeah. Because also, for instance, I don't hang out on Twitter and not on Instagram. I have the impression that Clubhouse is more the Instagram crowd. And well, Twitter is a Twitter, and the Twitter crowd are people who like the short piece of information, the instant, the fast. So I can imagine that the conversations on Twitter spaces would be much higher paced, maybe also more tolerant with interruptions, because it's just, it's a tweet, let's be fast, let's not take our time. Whereas Instagram is, you scroll through, you see the images, you take the time, you dig deep. It's more about the kind of personal growth and maybe artsy topics.
Yeah, and then you jump onto LinkedIn and you're forbidden to share anything personal because it's a professional platform. But like you're right, each kind of platform has its own inherent culture as well. And I think it kind of relates back to what you were saying earlier around Butter and Zoom and Teams. And, like it's like, oh, wow, we're going on an excursion today. We're going to jump onto this platform. It's that experience. And I think that's great to note as facilitators. We're not just about the outcome. It's like, what's that experience we want to create? Which tech tool will do it for us?
Do you think that you can learn how to become a better listener through these audio only conversations, or is it something that you can only enjoy if you're already a good listener?
It killed me, right, being on this platform, because I think you might hear from this conversation with Miriam, I like laughing over the top and just jumping in. You can't do that in Clubhouse or these audio rooms. You have to wait patiently, and you're sort of waiting patiently, and then there might be a microsecond where you want to jump in, but someone else has jumped in first. So, and you can't have two voices at the same time. So you really need to like, just, yeah, I do actually think you would become a better listener. If you, I mean, you could tap out and go, I'm not interested, or you could accept the challenge and say, this is interesting. Now where it gets to a point is where sometimes someone can jump in ahead of you, and in one question or one story, the conversation's now moved on to another direction and you've missed your chance. So, but that's...
And then it's the inner game. So does it really matter?
Exactly. Then you're like, what does this exactly? Does this really matter? And then, that's part of it, is learning to share that, share the voices. Mm.
Interesting. I was just thinking whether someone like Oscar Trimboli, whether he would have the superpower or ability to actually sense when is the moment that someone will jump in. So basically to predict when someone is jumping in. And I think that maybe that's also the reason why I didn't survive on Clubhouse for so long. Because even the podcast interviews, I have them on video, right? And I think it was Jimbo Clark, who then after the recordings, his feedback was that it was easy to be in a conversation with me because I would give visual clues when I want to say something. So I would start to kind of use my hands and then move around. And I think I do the same in workshops to signal that it's now time to come to an end. And audio only, we don't have these tricks how to stop someone from oversharing in a gentle way.
Not in a gentle way. No, so you have to become very comfortable. And that's probably what, when I was a moderator, I probably had 2 or 3 sort of go-to interruption lines, like, may I just jump in there? I like the sound of that. Can I ask you a question on that? Like, and you can't hesitate. You have to, I thought it was crucial to protect the integrity of the room. So I didn't mind about being gracious or gentle. I was like, no, my job here is to protect the space. So it's my job to jump in.
Fascinating. Is this a skill that you...
brutal.
Yeah, and I think that's a skill that I actually would like to improve, to learn better, and how to do that, and also to have the confidence to do that, and knowledge that it's okay. So do you think that you became better in interrupting or guiding a conversation in the video format?
No, I think so. I think more in audio, because I think I relied on, in video, like you said, the nonverbal signals. So I'd kind of, you can just look somewhere else or grab a piece of paper, like just draw attention subtly in video. You don't have that option in audio. So you have to kind of go down that more direct route.
So are you using this skills now,
in video
skill in video?
But I think maybe I have, but I also think that's a progression, not purely because of audio, but more about my confidence. And because I've had Alan Weiss as my business coach, and in every coaching call I have with him, he'll just interrupt and keep it on track and keep it, at first I was like, this is a bit weird, but now I'm like, oh, this is good. A guy called Jim Rohn, who I really follow, is one of those motivational speakers back in the 80s. He talks about brevity and the importance of being brief, which I don't think in this podcast I've mastered that, but if you can say things powerfully and using less energy, that's a superpower in itself. And what I found as a participant on Clubhouse, when conversations were rambling, I was internally begging the host just to interrupt. And so having that empathy, I was like, right, I'm not going to be that host. I'll make sure that I keep things on track. So yeah, I think I have, but I think it's been an evolution of bringing it into video.
Yeah. And it's such a thing, that's such an interesting conversation, I think, because brevity, yes. And what I observe very often with participants is or with any human being. We say what we have to say, and then we continue to say the same thing, but in different ways. And then we ramble, and then we blubber, and then it becomes the blah, and then everyone zones out. So the magic is actually in interrupting at the point where, yes, you say it first, and then either you give time to digest the content. So brevity is great if you also allow for the time to actually, for your brain to, for your ears to hear and for your brain to process.
Mhm.
Because if it's just brief and you don't have any time, then it's, and you cannot pause. Sometimes you wish for a pause button, sometimes you wish for a fast forward button, right? Fast forward.
Well, they do have that on Zoom, don't they? Like, there's a button which is like, yes, let's zoom this along. No one's ever used that on me yet. No one's ever fast forwarded something I've done, but yeah. Or it's, so being the judge of that is interesting. And I think that relates to your personal threshold. And I think my bias is that I have a bias for, let's keep it quick and efficient. I want to build relationships, but the example you gave, I've seen that all too often in workshops, and that is one of my pet peeves. And so I'll really, my bias is like, I'll want to nip that, and I need to be more aware that maybe that needs to go on a bit as well. So it's all about moderating and thinking the balance. But yeah, I definitely have a tolerance for, like, let's keep this moving.
Which then brings us back to the, or not. It might just bring us back to what we discussed earlier, that we have different personalities, and some other personalities or group feel more thrown into that as opposed to something else. Mm. For me, it's the same. I'm a fast thinker. I like things to go fast and to move on. And if it takes too long, I have the impression that I'm wasting my time. And if I have the impression that I'm wasting someone else's time, that's the worst.
It's the worst. Yeah. And you can kind of tell, like, if you're feeling it and you look around and someone else is like, they're signaling a bit of, this has gone on a bit too long, then it's okay to then intervene. Yeah.
And then still kind of also acknowledging that, there are also other needs in the room, and not to take the responsibility, but just accepting that, okay, everyone can make out of that whatever they need. Yes. And we're not the police, not the time police.
Can I share, this is what you've just said there reminds me, I saw something on Twitter yesterday and I've been thinking about it. There was a guy on Twitter yesterday that said, he was talking about a workshop he ran, and he put people into breakout rooms. 6 people didn't choose to enter the breakout rooms. They just stayed in the main room, cameras off. He then joined a breakout room, and he had 4 participants in there. They weren't talking to each other. So he went onto Twitter and said, what would you have done? Right. That's the question. It was really interesting to follow it. And a lot of what I was seeing on Twitter was about the responsibility of the facilitator and how he should have done all of these different things. And that's where I was going as well. Obviously the preparation and setting it up. I think everyone listening to this would understand creating psychological safety. The other thing that popped into my mind, though, is like, hang on, like, what's the responsibility here of the people actually attending? Like, why is it that we have 100% of the responsibility on creating psychological safety on us as a guest? And I've just been playing with it, like, whose responsibility? Like, what's the ratio here? Like, I kind of felt bad for this guy, because it was like, you should have done this, and did you try this? And it's like, well, what about the group?
Very interesting. And it brings to mind the book that I mentioned before we hit record, The Big Leap, where he speaks about relationships, where relationships only function if both parts bring 100% of responsibility in. It's not a shared responsibility where you share 100%. No, both are 100% responsible, and then it's going to work. Right? And now, as I heard you speaking, I was thinking, what if we applied the same logic to groups? What if everyone had 100% responsibility for making this work for the group and for themselves?
Amazing.
And I think, yes, psychological safety is one part. So if someone doesn't feel safe, then they won't turn the camera on in the breakout room. The other one is, why am I here? If I don't see any necessity for sharing my thoughts, my knowledge, my presence, not even my face, And maybe something went wrong on many different levels, because I'm clearly wasting my time showing up, going to this breakout room, although I don't have anything to say, because I'm literally not showing up. And still I'm there, right? I mean, how much do I value my own time? And then what was the invitation that the facilitator actually made to invite this person into the space?
Yeah. And the responsibility of the client setting the expectation. There's like, I've just been thinking about the whole time, like where would that have gone wrong? What would I have done? Because I'm taking it on as like a case study. What would I have done? And I thought, hang on, why is it all about me? And then, but I do, because I think first time facilitator, I was all about personal response. I was more like 100% on the facilitator, because that's just the way that I live my life. But when I was thinking about it, I mean, recently in Australia, our Prime Minister did a statement about taking on personal responsibility. And everyone was getting quite angry about it, because they're like, well, we've got a government here. There's systems that create this. Personal responsibility only goes so far. And I thought, oh, interesting. So why doesn't that apply in workshops? Like, let's all, So thanks for sharing your thoughts on that. It's good to hear about that. 100, everyone brings 100%.
Yeah. And it also reminds me of how I have shifted in the way I invite participants to turn the camera on or not. So in the beginning, I was always, oh, please show your smiling faces. We want to see you, turn your camera on. No, I don't say anything. And I know that, and within the first 10 minutes, I throw them into a turn to your neighbor moment anyway. Turn to your neighbor, see who's sitting there, and introduce yourself. And usually when they're coming back, all the cameras are on anyway.
Yes, that first breakout room is wonderful.
Right? And if you do it in the first 10 minutes, and then most of those people, they won't then turn the camera back off, because it's a weird thing to do. And it's even more weird to kind of turn to your neighbor, but not to show your face. And if someone does that, I just trust that they have a good reason for it. And then it's none of my business to expose them and to risk the psychological safety, to put them on the thing and like, so why don't you have your camera on?
I know. That's exactly right. I challenge people all the time, because it kept coming up as a question, recurring question. How do I get people to turn their camera on? It's like, what's the intentionality? Why do you need their camera on? Is it to make you feel better? That's not a good enough reason. Like, I was treating sometimes like kind of treating like this, like a broadcast where it's like, I just bring all my energy into this camera. And if I can do that, convey the energy into that lens, like that's who I'm talking to. I'd find that I'd create the environment anyway.
Yeah.
Without having to be so like, turn your camera on.
And I think it's, we are competing with so many unknowns for the attention of the participants. Yeah. If they don't turn the camera on, either they have good reasons, maybe their physical appearance or the environment or something, or we're just not good enough in getting their full attention. If they decide to answer their emails or to do other stuff, or to paint their nails during the workshop, and that's why they have their camera off, then maybe we have to put in more of this energy that you just described.
Yeah, and I think we've got to also be careful about negative bias that we have. And that was what, when Mark Bowden, I had him on my show, a body language expert, and he said to me, stop reading he said, it's impossible to read group body language, like stop doing it. And so the reason to stop doing it is because we have a negative bias. So we'll, and it's probably, you would have heard this on, I'm sure other people have said it or have experienced it, where you got someone in your group, they've got their arms crossed and you think, oh, this person hates this. And then they're the ones that come up to you at the end and go, that was the best workshop I've ever attended. And you think, what? I thought you hated it, right? So don't interpret. The saving grace for me is that line, is that if people have their cameras off, it's not against me. It's there's like 1,000 reasons why they might not be engaging, have their camera off. I'll do my absolute best. But if the second I have that negative bias and I start thinking about that affects my energy, which is then reflected back. And then it's just like this awful sort of like slippery slope.
Reminds me of, I don't know, I guess you have the same, that you remember that one guest said something brilliant.
Yeah.
don't know who it was, about the fact that sometimes when we're in there are certain persons who can better focus and concentrate when they close their eyes, just to reduce the noise and to listen better. So having camera off can also be a sign of this, okay, let me close my eyes for a moment. And we don't know what's, as you said, we have so many biases. If someone closed their eyes, our first thought is they're sleeping.
Exactly.
No, maybe they're listening.
Maybe that's the key word. Maybe they're sleeping. Maybe they're not interested. Maybe we don't know.
Yeah,
we don't know. Yeah.
After 200 episodes, and I surely asked you the question already when we last time spoke, but what makes a workshop fail?
Rigidity is rigidity, rigidity, being so rigid in what you do. Kind of alluded to what I said earlier around so tied to the agenda, so tied to getting an outcome that there is no flow and you're not actually picking up what's going on. So yeah, I think that's the one word that makes it fail.
And do you think that yes, I agree. And I wonder whether whether you need more rigidity in a voice only session.
Yes.
And whether
yes, but I think it's probably more looking at the extreme rigidity where like Leanne 2012 would be extreme rigidity. Leanne. And you're right, in voice, I actually wrote this in my article about moderating Clubhouse, was like, you actually need to be, I actually had more intentional, more purposeful. You can still be loose with that, but still have structure and purpose, as opposed to being rigid, which is, right, you get the talking stick for 60 seconds and now we're moving on to the next person, which might work in some contexts. Again, it maybe depends on what your outcome is. But yeah, good call. There definitely needs to be more intentionality and more orchestrated design.
True, and then the purpose, because I was thinking, what is the responsibility to stick to the topic? So on Clubhouse, you define the topic, and then, as you said, people can come in and out. So when they come in, it's always good to set the scene. Okay, this is the purpose, this is what we're doing. And then from workshop facilitation, we know #rigidity, that sometimes we go in a totally different direction. Same with the podcast, right? And then to what extent is it then the responsibility to be a little bit more rigid because you want to keep the promise that has been on the label, or to say, okay, we started there, whoever showed up on time was allowed to shape the conversation with us, and now we went in a different direction. Sorry for you guys.
I think again, it goes back to purpose. So often with the rooms, like if it was a very broad topic like business of the future, I mean, that could go in many different directions. If it's more focused, like how to make your first sale when you're starting out as a facilitator, there's kind of two different dynamics there. So the rigidity would kind of, for that second topic around getting business as a facilitator, I would actually keep driving that. Like, tell us a story of how you got your first contract and like, what did that involve? As opposed to, you can be a bit more looser with that first category and kind of go with the flow there. But again, I think, I mean, I what have 95% of your guests talked about purpose as part of their workshops? Like, I don't think I'm sharing anything new or revolutionary there. It's what it always goes back to. It's like the North Star of making our decisions is, what is the purpose? And sometimes with these Clubhouse conversations, it's not about sparring on a topic. It's just connecting with people around the world. That's the purpose. So you can let it go loose because it's all about just having fun and talking.
Interesting. I somehow feel, because when I host sessions or coach as a facilitator, so even plan my own workshops, I rarely use the word never, but this time I use it intentionally, have a breakout room with more than 4, maximum 5 people. Because I just don't believe that we can have a conversation with more than 5 people around it, even in the physical space. If you have more than 5, then the first 2 will start turning to the neighbor and having a side conversation. And then it breaks up into side conversations. So this means you need smaller breakout groups, right? So to what extent is it really possible to have this around the world conversation in a room full of people?
Well, in the Clubhouse example and Twitter Spaces as well, there's like a stage and then there's observers. So if you have a room with 300 people, there still might be, I mean, I've been in rooms where there's been 100 people on stage. So the host then should really sort of push people that aren't speaking back to back to the seat. I think that would signal what's actually happening, because you think 100 people, I've got no chance of being here. Like, what's even the point? And I'm in a mastermind. We've got 7 people in the group. And I think 7 is the upper limit. It is, in terms of airtime and space, it is tricky. So I think I think 5 would be every 2 weeks.
For 2 hours then?
For about 90 minutes.
That's really short in terms of.
It is really short. So I think you nailed it with that. But the purpose for someone joining a conversation might not be that they want to participate. They're like the same reason why people listen to podcasts. Like, why are they listening to a podcast? Well, it feels like I'm at a dinner party with Miriam and Leanne. I'm sitting beside them, but I'm eavesdropping on what they're talking about, right? That's the experience you get. So people are jumping into these rooms because, and the reason I jumped in is like, I'm interested in this technology and what people are talking about. I want to learn the lingo. I don't necessarily want to participate, but I can get the feeling of this. I can be out walking and get that same experience. And that's growth for me. So whereas a workshop is, most people are active participants, right? Usually the only observers are the ones like the HR person or the training coordinator. I always try and bring them in though. Like if they're coming in, they're participating.
Yeah, I don't allow tourists. I think I have the podcast episode with Pam Hamilton. She called them tourists. She had all different kinds of names for these people who come in and out and those who stand in the back of the room. And no, I don't allow any of those. And I even started to have a fine. So we decide on a number of participants in a workshop, and then I charge additional 300 euros for every additional one coming in.
Awesome.
Because I think we tend to over-invite anyway, and then we over-invite those who don't have a role just because someone doesn't dare to say no. And these stand by the sidelines and observe, and it does impact the group dynamics. How comfortable and psychological safety, how safe do I feel if I expose myself and speak, knowing that someone is just consuming without participating and sharing?
It's weird. I was in a Clubhouse room. I think I was talking. I don't know who joined the room, but it was someone quite notable. And I just lost my track. I couldn't construct a sentence, and I just like ended it and then stopped talking because it really threw me for that reason. Or maybe I was sharing a story and maybe someone was in there. I didn't want that story sort of heard by many people. I can't remember that, but that's interesting about the dynamic of jumping in and out. How do you create psychological safety quickly? But that absolutely, like, I remember my mind going, stop talking right now.
I had that at some instances at Clubhouse. And I wonder whether this is why you can, from the platform perspective, or inherently in the platform, you cannot record. So that's one way to create psychological safety, to say, okay, it's whatever happens here, but you cannot take it away. Trusting that everyone would stick by the rules and not find a way to still record the conversation.
Yeah,
I know that some did.
They have. Yeah, I've heard these. Yeah, definitely. I think the context we're talking about as well, like if companies are looking at, or people looking at, hosting audio rooms to 5 people and that dynamic, I would hope that we feel protected and we can use some of the same skills we've inherited, like we talked about before, just being a bit more intentional. The craft of moderating these other rooms, I think that the best advice would be, just listen to what you're enjoying. Think of your favorite radio DJ, and more often than you would in an in-person or video workshop, like restate the purpose and do it in a cool way, like succinctly. Bang, this is why we're here. Give the rules, raise your hand if you want to jump in. This room will close in an hour, that type of. Annoyingly, the housekeeping has to come in quite frequently as well. I hate housekeeping. It bores me to tears.
Yes. And then, yeah, keeping it sharp and keeping it light and fun.
Yeah.
Makes sense. What would be your advice for someone? Maybe I can ask you for 2 pieces of advice. One piece of advice for someone who starts the facilitation journey, and one piece of advice for someone who thinks, I've been in this facilitation space and I wonder what could come next.
Oh, great. You're an ace at asking questions. I love your show. Okay. For the first one, my advice would be find a kick-ass co-facilitator. Someone that is you admire. That's how I got my step up and confidence was they were running a 2-day workshop and I got to run an hour every day. So an hour segment that was comfortable for me. I got feedback and I wasn't on my own. I wasn't in that deep end. So that would be my tip. It'd be, if you're curious around this, see if you can find someone to shadow and just jump on that, because you get the experience from time on your feet. You need to feel the nerves in the morning. You need to feel what it takes to design it. You need to feel all that. And you can't learn it from reading or theory. You need to step in. In terms of the second one, moving, the beauty of facilitation is you can go anywhere, really. That's probably the hard part as well, is because you can go anywhere. It really opens up a whole new world. I think the people that a poll I posted on Facebook was, would you describe yourself as a multi-potentialite? This is to a group of facilitators. And now, I think it was 95% of people voted yes. I think we're drawn to this profession because we love variety. So my personal journey is moving to, I want to create more change and influence within organizations. I want to change the way we work, and I need to do that at a different level, which is why I'm losing the tag of facilitator, but not losing the skill. I am carrying it right with me. That's my personal journey. I think anyone, gosh, you could go in so many different industries. That's the magic of it. So reflect on your strengths, what you enjoy, and give it a go. Get uncomfortable.
I just want to repeat the sentence that you just said. I gonna now it left. You're gonna remove the label of a facilitator, but not the skill. Something along these lines.
Yeah.
The tag of a facilitator, but not the skill. Oh,
yeah.
Beautiful.
Of course not. It's the best skill in the world. Why would you want to? It's unreal. If you have it close to your heart, you use it all the time. Coffees, diffusing situation. We're constantly using it. It's the best skill to have. So
yes,
just not pulling yourself out.
Yeah, and I think that's the beauty, right? So we collect all these different skills in our lives pre-facilitator, and then we eventually have the confidence to call ourselves facilitators, and we grow in this role, and then we have all these facilitation skills, and then we carry these along to then take up the next role where we do facilitate, and still don't call ourselves facilitator.
Yeah, you could call yourself a trainer, you could call yourself many different things, and I think that's everyone's personal choice on where they want to go. Yeah, so for me, I guess I see facilitator, the word more as a verb / adjective as opposed to the noun. It was a noun last year. I want to move it into more of the way that I do things.
Wonderful. Is there anything that is on your mind that you would like to share with the audience that we haven't touched upon yet?
No, you've directed a beautiful conversation. I've really enjoyed it. You alluded to prep questions beforehand, and we've gone into awesome territory today. So thank you for being a marvelous host.
Thank you for joining me on this kind of just jamming session. I felt we covered a lot.
We did. I loved it. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Dum, 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 dum.